Dorset, September, 1816. The window was not large. It was a second-floor casement in the east wing of Penvale House, narrow enough that a woman in a morning dress had to turn sideways to fit through it, and high enough above the garden that the drop to the stone ledge below required a degree of commitment that most people would have called reckless, and Corabel Thane called necessary. She had removed her shoes. She had assessed the distance. She had listened at the bedroom door for the sound of Lord Brackett's voice in the corridor below, the particular drone of a person who had been talking about himself for 40 minutes and showed no signs of having exhausted the subject, and she had made her decision with the clarity she applied to all decisions that involved self-preservation. The ledge was 18 inches wide. The garden wall was 6 feet below. The lane beyond the wall led to the coastal path, and the coastal path led to the headland. And the headland was where she went when the world required more management than she was prepared to give it. She was not running away. She was declining to remain in a room where her continued presence would be interpreted as encouragement by a suitor who had confused her silence for interest 3 times already that autumn. Lady Penvale had arranged the visit. Lady Penvale arranged everything in the county of Dorset that involved eligible women and available men with the operational confidence of a woman who had been doing it for 30 years and had never once considered that the parties involved might have formed their own opinions. Lord Brackett was her candidate for Corabel. The baronet was 41 with land in Hampshire and an income that was respectable without being remarkable, and a way of entering a room that suggested he believed the room had been waiting for him. He had opinions about horses, about politics, about the proper conduct of young women, and he delivered these opinions with the serene confidence of someone who had never been interrupted by a person he considered worth listening to. Corabel had been polite in August. She had been patient in September. She was now, on the 23rd of September, climbing out a window, which was neither polite nor patient, but was, she felt, proportionate. Her father, Matthias Thane, was downstairs in the Penvale drawing-room, aware that the baronet had called again, aware that his daughter had excused herself 20 minutes ago and had not returned, and aware, with the quiet certainty of a father who had raised this particular daughter for 23 years, that she was no longer in the house. Matthias Thane had built his fortune in the shipping trade out of Bristol. He had a merchant's eye for value, a card player's face, and the settled patience of experience, having learned that the most expensive mistakes were the ones made in haste. He had not told Corabel what to do about Lord Brackett. He had not told Corabel what to do about anything since she was 17, when he had discovered that her judgment, while occasionally alarming in its execution, was fundamentally sounder than most of the men he did business with. He trusted her. He also trusted that she would manage the window without breaking an ankle, because she had climbed out of worse windows in Bristol when she was 14. Corabel reached the garden wall, dropped into the lane, put her shoes back on, and walked toward the ridge in the early morning light, with the unhurried stride of a woman who was not fleeing, but choosing. The Dorset coast in late September had a sharpness to it, the summer warmth still in the ground, but the light more honest, making everything it touched look like a decision rather than an accident. She reached the path and turned east, toward the point where the land dropped to the sea, and she was thinking about Lord Brackett and Lady Penvale and the particular exhaustion of being a woman with a fortune and no title in a county that considered the first a commodity and the second a prerequisite, when she saw the man standing at the edge. He was facing the sea. He was tall and still in the way of a person who had been standing in one place for some time, not admiring the view, but using it to think. He wore a dark coat that was well made and practically cut, the garment of wealth spent on things that worked rather than things that announced themselves. She did not recognize him from behind. She would have walked past, but he turned at the sound of her footsteps, and she saw his face in the September sunrise, and two things happened at once. She recognized him, the Duke of Dunmore. She had seen him twice before at county occasions, both times at a distance, both times in a room that arranged itself around him with the gravitational deference given to the oldest title in Dorset and 12,000 acres of the county's best land. She had not spoken to him. Dukes did not speak to the daughters of Bristol shipping merchants at county assemblies. They occupied different rooms within the same room. The second thing was the way he regarded her. It was not surprise. It was the look of a man who had come to this place to be alone with whatever he was carrying, and had been interrupted by a woman with shoes in one hand, and the wind-blown appearance of someone who had recently exited through a window and was recalculating his morning. "You are out early," he said. "I am," she said. He glanced at the shoes. She did not explain them. He did not ask. The silence between them lasted exactly long enough to establish that neither of them was going to observe the expected social ritual, and then he said, with a directness she had not expected from a duke, "You have come from Penvole House." It was not a question. "I have," she said. "You left in some haste." His gaze moved to the hem of her dress, marked with grass from the garden wall, and then back to her face. "I left at precisely the speed the situation required," she said. The Duke of Dunmore was 34. His name was Severin Ashcroft, and the county knew three things about him with certainty. He was wealthy. He was private. And he had buried his first wife, Lady Isabel, 2 years ago in circumstances that the county discussed in low voices. Lady Isabel had been beautiful and volatile, and had conducted herself in a manner that gave Dorset a full season of whispered conversation, and had left the Duke with a reputation for silence and a household that ran with mechanical efficiency and no warmth. The county understood he was expected to marry again. It also understood, from 2 years of observation, that he had arranged his life so the question never arose in any room he occupied. He was, Corabelle considered, watching the sea the same way she had been walking the coastal path, not admiring it, using it. "I should not disturb you," she said. "You are not disturbing me," he said, with a pause that gave the sentence more weight than he intended. "Is Lady Penvale expecting your return?" "At some point," Corabelle said. "She is currently entertaining Lord Brackett in the drawing room. I was meant to be part of the entertainment." Something moved in his face, a flicker, not amusement exactly, but recognition. "And you chose the window instead," he said. She had not mentioned a window. "The grass," he said. "The shoes, the direction." He paused. "I have attended one of Lady Penvale's introductions. The window is an understandable response." "You speak from experience," she said. "I speak from 2 years spent making myself unavailable to every matchmaker in Dorset, and has not yet found a method more effective than the sunrise." He considered the sea. "I was not aware I would need to share it." She looked at him, standing in the morning with the bearing of a person who had come here to escape the same machinery she had, and she concluded this was either a coincidence or the beginning of a complication, and she was not sure which would be worse. "I will leave you to it," she said. She turned toward the path. "Miss Thane," he said. She stopped. She had not given him her name. He had not asked, but he knew it, which meant he had noticed her at the county occasions she had assumed she was invisible at, and that was information she would need to account for. "The path along the North Ridge," he said, "is shorter back to Penvole, and avoids the lane where Lord Brackett's carriage is likely still waiting." She held his gaze. He was not smiling, but something in his stillness had shifted, and she understood he was not offering directions. He was offering an opinion about Lord Brackett, and the opinion matched hers, and he had delivered it as geography. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. She took the North Ridge path. She did not look back. But she was aware that he watched her, until the path curved beyond the ridge, and she considered the way he had read the grass and the shoes and assembled the correct story without requiring her to tell it. And she concluded, that is either very perceptive or very practiced, and either way, I should be careful. She arrived at Penvale House through the kitchen garden, entered through the scullery door, climbed the back stairs, and was in her room with her shoes on and her hair repinned before Lady Penvale had registered her absence as anything more than a prolonged retreat to the powder room. Her father found her in the upstairs sitting room 10 minutes later. Lord Brackett had departed. Matthias Thane sat across from his daughter, with the look she knew, the one that meant he had assembled most of the picture and was waiting for her to supply the remaining piece. "The window," he said. "The window," she confirmed. "And the headland?" She had not told him. "Your hem," he said. "The marks go in 2 directions, out and back. But you came through the kitchen, which means you went further than the garden." "I walked to the coastal path," she said. "In September," her father said. "At sunrise, before breakfast, without shoes." He waited. "Corabel," he said, "what are you running from?" "I am not running," she said. "I am declining Lord Brackett. You have declined the man 3 times by my count. You do not need a window for a 4th. She was quiet. What she was running from was not Lord Brackett specifically, but the entire machinery of arrangements and expectations, and the relentless assumption that a woman with £80,000 and no title existed primarily as a solution to someone else's problem. "I met someone on the coastal path," she said. Her father waited. "The Duke of Dunmore," she said. Her father's expression did not change, but something behind it rearranged. "He knew my name," she said. He had not been told it. "What did he say to you?" "He told me the shorter path was not actually shorter," she said. "It was better." Her father held her gaze. Then he nodded, once, and the morning continued, and Corabel sat in the sitting room and considered the kind of man who offered a path that wasn't shorter, but better. And she decided, I should be careful. And then she decided, I am not sure careful is what I intend to be. The invitation to Dunmore Hall arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks later. It came addressed to Matthias Thane in a secretary's hand, concerning a matter of business rather than society, which was the first thing she noticed and the thing that held her attention. The Duke was hosting a meeting of county landowners to discuss coastal erosion threatening the eastern cliffs for 3 seasons. Attendance was requested from all property holders with land east of the Dunmore boundary. Matthias Thane held no land in Dorset, but the invitation had come with a note appended in a different hand, one she recognized from instinct alone, the way she knew the weight of a contract before reading the terms. The note said, Mr. Thane, the matter concerns coastal property. I understand you have been considering investments in the Dorset coast. Your perspective would be valued. Dunmore. She read the note 3 times. Dalbane. She held it up to the light, as though the paper itself might reveal something the words did not. She read the word valued, and weighed what it meant when a duke used it about a shipping merchant who had no land in his county, and a daughter who had escaped through a window 3 weeks ago. He was inviting her father. He knew she would come with her father. She showed the note to Matthias. He read it with the expression he wore when examining a shipping contract that contained an unusual clause. Coastal erosion, he said. I have no coastal property. No, she said. He studied the handwriting. He studied his daughter, standing by the window with the particular stillness she had when she was thinking 3 moves ahead. You want to go, he said. The meeting concerns significant county infrastructure, she said. Corabel, he said. I want to go, she said. Her father was quiet for a moment. He set down the invitation. He regarded his daughter as he would a ledger that contained an entry he had not expected but could not dispute. In 23 years, he had learned to distinguish between Corabelle's professional interest and her personal interest, and he was clearly registering that this invitation had produced both, in proportions she was not volunteering. "Then we will go," he said, "and you will tell me afterward what this is actually about." She nodded. She did not tell him what it was actually about because she had not yet decided what it was actually about, and she had long ago resolved never to present conclusions that were still in draft. But she went to the casement after he left the room, and she looked out at the Dorset morning, at the line of the coastal path visible on the ridge, and she allowed herself to consider the possibility that a man who could have invited anyone to a meeting about erosion had chosen to invite a Bristol shipping merchant with no land and no standing and no reason to attend except the reason neither of them was naming. And she decided that the invitation was not about coastal property. It was about a woman with a notebook. And she was going to bring the notebook, and she was going to use it. And if the meeting turned out to be only about erosion, then she would have lost nothing except an afternoon. And if it turned out to be about something else, she would know it by his expression when she walked into the room, and she would proceed from there with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Dunmore Hall was larger than she had prepared for, which did not happen to her often. She prepared for rooms the way her father prepared for negotiations, by knowing the dimensions before she walked through the door. But Lady Penvale's description had not captured the character of the scale. Dunmore Hall was not ostentatious. It was a house that had been there for 200 years, built by people who assumed it would be there for 200 more, and had not felt the need to prove anything. The stone was local, the proportions were correct, the grounds were maintained with the discipline of a working estate rather than the theater of a showpiece. She filed this alongside the practical coat and the directness at sunrise, and she concluded, "This house is a sentence he has written about himself, and I am reading it fluently, and that should concern me more than it does." The meeting was in the estate office, not a formal reception room. 14 men were present, landowners and stewards, and one woman. Her father sat near the east-facing glass. She sat beside him and opened the leather-bound notebook she used for shipping accounts, and the room noticed the notebook, the way rooms notice things that do not belong, silently and completely. The Duke entered at 10, dressed for the estate, not for company, and his gaze passed over her with exactly the same weight it gave every other person in the room. The meeting concerned the eastern cliffs. 3 farms had lost acreage to winter storms. The coastal path was unstable. The drainage from upper fields was accelerating the erosion, and the cost of remediation was significant enough that no single landowner could bear it. She listened for 40 minutes and took notes. She watched the Duke manage the room with quiet authority, and she noticed that the landowner's deference was not merely habitual. He had earned it. He spoke about the land the way her father spoke about shipping routes, with the intimacy of long acquaintance and the precision of continuous study. He knew the drainage patterns, the soil composition, the history of each farm's boundary, and he referred to each tenant by name, not as an abstraction. At the 45-minute mark, the discussion turned to funding. The landowners began the familiar circling of men who agreed something must be done and disagreed about who should pay. The Duke let the circling continue for 10 minutes, then said, with the economy she was beginning to recognize as his natural mode, "The cost will be shared proportionally by acreage at risk. Dunmore will bear 40%. The room accepted this. She should have stayed quiet. She knew the room and her position in it. She spoke. "The proportional division by acreage," she said, and 14 men turned to face her, "does not account for differential benefit. The farms closest to the erosion line benefit most from remediation. A flat share penalizes the inland estates. A tiered assessment based on proximity would be more equitable and more likely to secure full participation. The room was silent, not offended, but recalibrating. She kept her eyes on the Duke. He was studying her with something she had not seen before, something underneath the composed authority, something that looked like a man encountering information he had not expected and finding it more useful than the thing he had planned. The tiered approach, he said, after a pause, that meant he had weighed it seriously. How would you structure it? She described a 3-tier system with declining contribution rates and a 2-year review mechanism, with the fluency of a woman who had been structuring shipping contracts since she was 18 and could build a financial framework the way others built needlework, from the inside out with every thread accounted for. When she finished, he said, "We will adopt the tiered structure. Miss Thane will provide the detailed assessment to my steward by Friday." He moved to the next item. He did not thank her. He did not compliment her. He treated her contribution as he had treated every other, as information received and acted upon. And she recognized that this was the highest respect available because it meant he had not made an exception for her. The meeting concluded at noon. She remained in her chair, closing her notebook. "Miss Thane," he said. He was standing by the east-facing window. "Your father's shipping interests, they include coastal infrastructure?" She stood. "My father's interests include anything that generates a reliable return," she said. "And your interests?" "My interests," she said, "are my own." "I would like to show you the eastern cliffs," he said. "The erosion is best understood from the ground." "I will need to change my shoes," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, suppressed before it arrived. She noted the suppressed smile, because it told her something the full one would not have, which was that he was not someone who smiled easily, and whatever had nearly produced one was not something he had been expecting. They walked 2 miles along the eastern edge of the Dunmore estate, where the land dropped to the sea in crumbling shelves, chalk and clay and flint layered like pages of a book the ocean was reading from the bottom up. He spoke about the erosion differently now, without the room listening, just the information delivered with the same directness she had first encountered at sunrise. She asked about drainage patterns and tenant agreements and cost projections, and he answered with a thoroughness that told her he respected the questions. And the questions shifted without either of them directing it from geology to the estate, to the county, to how each of them approached problems. And she realized that she had not had a conversation this honest in Dorset since she had arrived, and possibly not in Bristol either, because even her father, who was the most honest man she knew, softened things for her sometimes, and this man was not softening anything. He stopped where the path turned inland. "This is where the worst of it is," he said. 2 years before the eastern field is gone. "What will you do with the families?" she said. It was the first question she had asked about people, rather than land or money. 3 holdings inland, he said. "The families will be relocated. The terms will be favorable." He said it simply, but she heard what was underneath it, which was that he had already considered the terms, already drafted them in his mind, already worked out what each family would need and what the relocation would cost, and had absorbed that cost into his own estimate before presenting the tiered proposal to the room. He was watching the drop with the bearing she had seen at sunrise, and she saw clearly that the erosion was not merely a logistical problem for him. It was a failure he was taking personally. "You cannot hold the ground," she said. "No. I can move the people. I cannot hold the land." He met her gaze. "There are things you protect," he said, "and things you let go of, and the decision depends entirely on knowing which is which." Which is? She considered him, a man who had buried a wife and closed his house and come to a headland at sunrise to be alone, and who had just told her his philosophy in a sentence about geology, and she concluded, I understand him better than I should after 2 conversations, and that is either a gift or a warning. At the Dunmore gates, her father was waiting. In the carriage, he waited until they were through the gates. "Well," he said. "He invited you to walk the cliffs," her father said. "He invited me to see the erosion," she said. "And did you?" "I saw a great deal," she said. Her father nodded. "Which of my 2 theories should I discard?" "Keep both," she said. "I have not decided yet either." The assessment was delivered to the Duke's steward on Friday. 14 pages. 3-tier structure, contribution rates, review mechanism, and appendices including drainage calculations, soil composition data sourced through her father's London contacts, and a cost analysis covering 3 erosion scenarios, more than had been asked for. She was aware of this. She had done it anyway, because the problem was genuinely interesting, and because she wanted him to see the full scope of what she could build, and she was not going to examine that second reason too closely. His response came Saturday, in his own hand, delivered at first light. "Miss Thane, the assessment is thorough, precise, and in several respects, superior to the work of my own steward, who has been doing this for 20 years. I have 2 questions regarding the soil composition appendix. I would prefer to discuss them in person. Would Tuesday suit? Dunmore." She read the word superior and understood what it cost him to write it. Someone who had been managing 12,000 acres since he was 20 and did not distribute praise like pleasantries. He was stating a conclusion, and the conclusion cost him something, and he wrote it anyway. Tuesday suited. She told him so in 3 lines with no social padding, because the absence of padding between them had become its own form of intimacy, though she would not have used that word yet. She arrived at Dunmore Hall at 10 on Tuesday, alone for the first time. The Duke was at the estate office desk with her assessment open and 2 pages marked. He pushed the document across. "The geological survey," he said. "Where did you find it?" "My father's contacts in London. The Royal Institution published a coastal survey in 1812. The Dorset section is limited, but the methodology is sound. I extrapolated the local data from the broader findings." "You extrapolated geological data," he said. "I am comfortable with extrapolation," she said, "when the source methodology is reliable." He considered the assessment with the careful internal calculation of a mind that revised its positions on evidence rather than impulse. "The second question concerned the review mechanism," he said. "You proposed 2 years. I would prefer 3. 3 years allows a full erosion cycle," she said, "but it allows costs to accumulate without correction. A 2-year review with an optional extension addresses both concerns." "You negotiate like your father," he said. "I negotiate like myself," she said. "My father taught me the method. The application is my own." Something shifted in his face, not the suppressed smile, something less guarded, something that resembled someone watching a door open he had believed was permanently shut. "Miss Thane," he said, and his voice dropped below the register he used for estate business, "I should tell you something about this meeting." She waited. "The questions about the appendix are genuine," he said. "They are also not the reason I asked you to come." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "You knew," he said. "I wrote 14 pages," she said. "The appendices were not strictly necessary. She had written them because she wanted him to see what she could build, and because she wanted to give him a reason to ask her to come, and because she had not been willing to leave the invitation to chance. The unspoken agreement between them about what this was, the contract they had been negotiating since the headland, the one that said this is business, was no longer sustainable. "I have been very careful since Isabel," he said. She did not speak. She let the name take the space it needed. She did not fill the silence with reassurance or questions, or the kind of sympathetic murmuring that other women might have offered, and that would have made him stop talking. She simply waited, the way she waited for a contract clause to reveal its full meaning, the way her father waited for a negotiation to show its true shape. She was difficult, he said. He was looking at the window. Not difficult in the way the county means it. Difficult in the way that made it impossible to know what was true. She put on feelings the way other women put on gloves. Every affection, every loyalty, every tenderness. And I could not tell, for 3 years of marriage, which of it was real. I concluded eventually that none of it was, and I was not entirely wrong. And by the time I understood the difference, she was gone, and the understanding was useless. He turned from the window. I have been avoiding everyone, he said, because the cost of misjudging again felt larger than the cost of being alone. She held his gaze across the desk, across the thorough, unsentimental work that said everything about her that mattered. I do not put on anything, she said. I know, he said. That is the problem. He paused. I had a system. The system was solitude, and the sunrise and the work, and it was functional. And then a woman climbed out a window and appeared at sunrise without shoes, and the system has not been functional since. She let the sentence settle. She recognized what it cost him, someone who had organized his grief into architecture, and was now telling her that the architecture was failing, and she understood that responding honestly would cost her something too, and she decided the cost was acceptable. I climbed out the window because of Lord Brackett, she said. I went to the headland because of myself. I came to the meeting because of you. She paused. I have not been putting on a show. I have been deciding, and I have not finished deciding. But I want you to know that the evidence so far is compelling. Compelling, he said. It is a preliminary assessment, she said. He smiled, not the suppressed version. The full one, arrived and unhesitating, and she saw what his face looked like when it was not being guarded, and the sight of it cost her something she was going to have to account for. The autumn assembly at Whitfield House was the county's last significant gathering before winter. Whitfield was a Palladian manor 3 miles east of Penval, owned by the Fenwick family, who had hosted the autumn assembly for 40 years, with the institutional reliability of people who believed tradition was a form of good manners. 40 people. Cora Bell arrived with Lady Penvale and her father, who had come from Bristol because she had asked him to, which she did rarely enough that when she did, he cleared his calendar without question. She wore a blue-gray dress made in London by a dressmaker, who understood that the purpose of a dress was not to attract attention, but to make the wearer feel accurate. She felt accurate, and she entered the room with the composure of a woman who had spent the last month earning the county's attention on her own terms. The Duke was across the room with 2 landowners from the erosion meeting, and when she entered, the quality of his attention shifted in a way the room registered. The evening proceeded. She talked with Mrs. Alderton about winter planting. She talked with a young woman named Miss Carew, who was nervous about her first assembly, and reminded Cora Bell of herself at 19, before she had learned that nervousness could be converted into observation if you paid close enough attention to the room. She was aware throughout that the Duke was making a circuit that was not random, bringing him steadily nearer with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided where he was going. Lord Brackett was there. She had prepared for him. What she had not prepared for was the version who arrived at her elbow during the interval with a glass of wine he had not offered her, and the bearing of a man who had decided to be wounded in public. "Miss Thane," he said, loud enough for the 6 nearest people to hear without effort. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your work on the coastal erosion project. Quite the achievement for a merchant's daughter." He let the word merchant land, with the deliberation of a man who had spent time selecting it for maximum effect, in a room full of people whose grandfathers had never worked for a living. The county is lucky to have such industrious new arrivals. His gaze moved, briefly and unmistakably, toward the Duke. One does hope the industry is appreciated in the right quarters. She was formulating her response, the precise, surgical one she had been refining since August, when the Duke's voice came from her right. Not the voice she had heard in the estate office or on the walk along the cliffs. A different register entirely. The one that carried 200 years of Dorset in it and knew exactly what weight it held. The coastal assessment, the Duke said, stepping into the conversation with the timing of someone who had been closer than she had realized and had been listening with complete attention, was adopted in full by the county landowners last week. He faced Lord Brackett with the same steadiness he brought to crumbling ground and unstable conditions. The tiered contribution model Miss Thane designed will save the affected estates an estimated £400 over the initial projections. He paused. Industry is the word for it. Expertise would be more precise. The baronet's composure underwent a visible adjustment, the kind that involved rapidly recalculating the social cost of continuing versus the social cost of retreating. Your Grace, I merely meant. What you meant, the Duke said with the economy of a voice that had never required volume, was heard clearly by everyone present. I will assume it was a compliment poorly expressed, because the alternative would require a longer conversation than either of us would enjoy. He held Lord Brackett's gaze for one moment longer than the social register required, which was the ducal equivalent of a direct statement, and Lord Brackett found somewhere else to be with the haste of someone who had been corrected in public and needed time to recover his position. Corabelle stood beside the Duke in the aftermath and weighed what had happened with her usual thoroughness. He had not defended her honor. He had not championed her cause. He had inserted accurate information into a room that was receiving inaccurate impressions, as he would have corrected a faulty survey or a miscalculated boundary. He had made it about the work, not about her, and in doing so had made it impossible for Lord Brackett to continue without appearing to argue with results rather than with a woman. He had protected her without diminishing her, and had done it so cleanly that the room understood his position without requiring him to make a declaration. She turned to him quietly. £400, she said. I had the steward run the numbers this morning, he said. You came to this assembly with the numbers prepared. I came prepared for several contingencies, he said. The baronet was one of them. And the others? The others, he said, are still developing. She held his gaze and felt the room rearrange around them, the other guests resuming their conversations, the evening resuming its shape. But the space between her and the Duke had changed permanently, and everyone in the room could see it, and she was surprised to discover she did not mind. She wanted to tell him that what he had done was the most elegant thing she had ever witnessed in a social setting, that the precision of it, the restraint, the refusal to make it about anything other than accuracy, was worth more to her than 100 conventional defenses. She did not say any of this. She did not need to. He knew. She could see it in the way he stood beside her, not touching, not performing proximity, just present, in the way that had become their language since September. She looked across the room. She saw Lady Penville watching them with visible satisfaction, and she could see that Lady Penville believed the evening was going exactly as she had planned. It was not. Nobody had planned this. This was what happened when two people who did not put on a show found themselves in the same room and stopped pretending that the room was the reason they were there. He came to Penvale House on a Monday morning in late October, on foot, which meant he had walked 4 miles from Dunmore Hall, which meant he had made a decision that required 4 miles of walking to confirm. She was in the kitchen garden, pruning the espaliered pear trees that the previous tenant had neglected for 2 seasons, and that responded to attention with the immediate gratitude of living things waiting for someone to notice them. The housekeeper told her the Duke of Dunmore was in the drawing room. She looked at her hands, which had soil on them. She considered changing. She considered washing and repinning and presenting herself with the composed perfection of a woman receiving a duke. She did not do any of it. She wiped her hands, removed her apron, and walked into the drawing room with soil under her fingernails and the settled certainty of a woman who had decided sometime between their first meeting. And now, that presenting herself to this particular man was something she was no longer willing to do. He was standing near the glass, the autumn light behind him. He turned, and his gaze went to her hands, the soil, the working dress. The hair loosened from its pins, and something in his expression opened in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the suppressed smile, something less defended, something that resembled relief, the relief of a man who had been bracing for artifice and had found instead a person standing in front of him exactly as she was. "You were in the garden," he said. "The pear trees," she said. "They have been neglected." "I owe you more than an apology," he said. She waited. He was standing very still. How he stood at the cliff edge, how he stood at the drop where the land fell away, the stillness of someone who used physical control as a substitute for emotional expression and was now trying to do the thing he had been substituting for. "On the headland," he said, "in September, when we first met. I said I had been making myself unavailable for 2 years, and I meant it as commiseration. But it was also a warning. I was telling you that I was not available, that whatever you had come looking for was not something I could provide." He paused. "I was wrong." She did not speak. She understood he was dismantling something he had built over 2 years, and the dismantling required the same care as the construction, and rushing it would break things that needed to be set down gently. "I was wrong," he said, "not because you proved me wrong, though you did, with the assessment and the erosion work, and the way you speak in rooms full of men who do not expect you to speak, and the way you do not pretend, which is the thing I could not stop considering after September." He turned to the window. "Isabel pretended everything," he said. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the authority he wore in public, stripped of the composure that had been his only defense since she died. Every moment, every word, every tenderness. And when she died, I could not mourn her properly, because I did not know which version of her I was mourning. And the grief was mixed with something worse than grief, which was doubt. And I decided that the safest response was no response, no risk, no one. He turned back to her. "And then you climbed out a window." She held his gaze across Lady Penville's drawing room, with the autumn light coming through the tall windows and falling across the space between them. "I did not climb out the window for you," she said. "I climbed out because Lord Brackett is tedious, and the morning was beautiful, and I have never been able to stay in a room that felt like a cage when there was a window available." She paused. "You were an accident of geography." He studied her. Then he smiled, fully, unreservedly, and she saw what his face looked like when it carried no weight at all, and the sight of it rearranged something in her she had not authorized. "An accident of geography," he said. "It is what happened," she said. "What happened after wasn't geography." "No. What happened after was choice. His and mine in alternation, since the morning on the cliff." He stepped toward her. She did not step back. He was close enough now that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the one that had nothing of assessment in it, and nothing of the estate office. Just this, the undefended version, the one he had been building toward since the suppressed smile on the walk along the cliffs. She felt the weight of it, and understood that this was what he looked like when he had stopped protecting himself, and that she wanted to be worthy of it. And that desire surprised her because she had never questioned her own worthiness before. "Corabelle," he said. She stilled. He had not used her name before. He had used Miss Thane at their first meeting, and in the office, and at the assembly. And now her given name was in Lady Penville's drawing room, and it changed the dimensions of the room entirely. Severin, she said. It arrived because his had arrived, and the exchange felt like a contract being signed, the kind where both parties knew the terms, and the signatures were a formality. I am not asking for a show, he said. I am not offering one, she said. I know. That is why I walked 4 miles. She put her hand on his arm. It was deliberate. He covered her hand with his. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It had the honesty of someone who had walked 4 miles and dismantled a fortress, and said the name he had been carrying since September, and was now acting on the conclusion with the same directness he brought to estate decisions and boundary assessments and the management of 12,000 acres. She kissed him back with the directness she brought to contracts and pruning shears and every true thing she had ever decided, and the drawing room was warm, and the autumn light came through the windows, and the pear trees were visible in the garden beyond, neglected for 2 years and now tended, and neither of them was pretending, and that was the entire point. Her father received the news that evening. He set down a letter from his Bristol office with the deliberate care of a man who wanted his hands free for the conversation. The Duke of Dunmore, he said. The man on the headland, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the casement, the narrow frame his daughter had climbed out of 2 months ago. Still there, still narrow, still 18 inches between the life Lady Penvale had been arranging and the life Cora Belle had chosen for herself. Is he good enough for you? He is trying to be, she said. And that is not a small thing from someone who stopped trying 2 years ago. Her father nodded. He picked up the Bristol letter. He put it down again. Your mother, he said, and stopped. Cora Belle waited. Her mother had died when she was 11. Her father mentioned her rarely, only when something mattered enough to require her presence in the room. And even then the words came slowly, as though he were handling something fragile that he had kept in the same place for 12 years and was not certain it would survive the air. He looked at his hands, the merchant's hands that had built a shipping empire and held a dying woman and raised a daughter alone. And he said, Your mother climbed out of a window once, in Bristol. She was 17. Her father was trying to marry her to a wool merchant, and she climbed out the window and walked to the harbor and met a shipping clerk who was working late on a manifest. He met his daughter's eyes. I was the shipping clerk. Cora Belle stared at her father. She considered her mother, remembered in fragments, the laugh, the hands, the way she moved through rooms as though the rooms were fortunate to have her, the way she could make Matthias Thane, who was not a man given to softness, soften entirely with a sentence. I did not know that, she said. Her voice was quieter than she intended. She said the window was not an escape, her father said. It was a direction. She chose the harbor. She chose the manifest. She chose the clerk. He paused. She chose well. Cora Belle held her father's gaze and considered the women in her family who climbed out of things that were wrong and walked toward things that were true. And the knowledge settled into her like an inheritance she had not known she was owed. She reached across and covered her father's hand, as he had covered hers when she was small, and the world was too large. And he let her, and neither of them said anything else, because some things required no words between people who understood each other, this completely. Severin's letter arrived the following morning, addressed to her, in his own hand. Cora Belle, your father will receive a formal letter today regarding terms and settlements. The terms are generous because your father's contribution is significant, and the settlements are correct because my solicitor has reviewed them twice, but none of it is the reason. The reason is the pear trees. The reason is 14 pages when 6 would have sufficed. The reason is a woman who climbed out a window and walked onto my headland without shoes, and has not pretended a single moment since, and I find I cannot go back to the headland alone. It is not the same without the interruption. S. She read this 4 times. She stood by the window where the morning light came in, the same window she had gone through in September, and she held the letter in both hands and felt the weight of it. Not the paper, but the honesty, the particular courage it took for someone who had been deceived by his first wife's words to put his own words on a page and send them to a woman before breakfast. She put it in the writing desk where she kept his letters. There were 7. Each one was longer than the last. Each one said more than the one before, as though he were teaching himself to speak again after 2 years of silence, and the teaching was going well. She went back to the pear trees. They were married in November at the village church on the road between Dunmore Hall and Penvale House. The church had a window behind the altar that faced east and caught the morning light, which she had noticed in October when she walked past on the coastal path and considered beginnings and endings and the buildings that held both. She wore blue-gray, the color of the Dorset Sea at dawn. Her father walked her in and held her arm with the steady grip of someone who had held this particular person since she was small and was now releasing her into a life he trusted because he trusted her, and because he had taken the measure of the man at the other end of the church as he took the measure of ships and contracts and had found him sound. Severin stood at the front and watched her come toward him with nothing guarded in his expression, nothing of September's isolation, nothing of the estate office's composure, just himself, entirely present, watching the woman who had appeared at sunrise and had dismantled his solitude by the simple method of being real. She reached him. She looked at the window behind the altar. She could feel her father releasing her arm, could feel the transition from one grip to another, from the man who had raised her to the man she had chosen, and the handoff was seamless in the way that only carefully considered things are seamless, because both men had weighed it and found the terms acceptable. She considered all the windows, the casement at Penvale she had climbed out of, which was an exit, the one in the estate office where he had stood while telling her the questions were genuine, but not the reason, which was an opening, the one in Lady Penvale's drawing room where the autumn light came through while he kissed her, which was an arrival, and this one, the church window, the one that faced the direction of the sunrise toward the place where they had met. It was none of those things. It was a beginning. She did not climb out of it. She stood in its light. She took his hand. He held it with the grip she knew, the one that meant what it agreed to. The wedding breakfast was at Dunmore Hall in the estate dining room, because Corabel had told Severin the estate dining room had better light and more honest proportions, and he had said, "You have been in this house twice, and you are already reorganizing it." And she had said, "I have been reorganizing things since I was 12. You are simply the latest." Lord Brackett was in attendance, seated in the 4th row, behaving with the dignity of someone who had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered that dignity was his only remaining option. Lady Penvale wept. Her father did not. Miss Carew was there, less nervous now than at the autumn assembly, and she found Corabel after the ceremony and said quietly, "You were the first person in Dorset who spoke to me as though I had something to say." Corabel looked at the young woman and remembered being 19 and invisible, and decided that if she was going to be a duchess, she was going to be the kind who noticed the people the room forgot. "Thank you," Corabel said. "Come to Dunmore Hall next week. The library needs organizing. I could use someone who pays attention." Her father found her at the edge of the room in the late afternoon. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. "He is happy," her father said. "I am happy," she said, "which is not a thing I say often, so you should note it." "I have noted it," he said. I have also noted that you have been studying the East Wing for 20 minutes with the expression you had when you redesigned the Bristol warehouse. The East Wing needs work, she said. The proportions are wrong in 2 rooms, and the library has no system whatsoever. Your mother, her father said, reorganized the Bristol office within a week of our marriage. She said the filing system had no logical basis. She was correct. Corabelle considered her mother, and the window, and the harbor, and the clerk, and she concluded, "We are women who climb out of things that are wrong and walk toward things that are true." Severin found her in the East Garden as the afternoon light stretched across the Dorset hills. She was looking at the view, the coastal path visible in the distance, the place where they had stood in September when she had been carrying her shoes and he had been carrying his grief, and neither of them had known what the morning was going to become. "I was thinking about the sunrise," she said. "The first one, when you told me the path was not shorter, but better." "I was thinking about the shoes," he said. "You were holding them, and your hem was marked, and you did not explain either. And I decided, this is a woman who does not explain herself. And I found that I wanted the explanation anyway, not because I required it, but because I wanted to hear her give it in her own time, without pretense." She stepped toward him. He met her in the middle of the garden. "All of it," he said. "The cliffs and the estate office, and the library with no system. All of it is yours in every sense that matters." She considered the coastal path in the distance. She considered windows, the casement at Penval, the ones she had stood beside, the one in the church that held the sunrise. She opened the garden gate. "Come," she said. "I want to show you the view from the East Wing. It is wasted on the current arrangement, and I have opinions." He followed her through the gate. She showed him the East Wing from the garden below, pointing to the windows that needed different proportions, and the room where the light fell wrong, and the corner where a morning room could be built if the wall were moved 6 feet. And he listened, and his attention had the quality she had first noticed on the headland, the quality of a man who was genuinely interested in what she was saying, and not merely waiting for her to finish. The November afternoon went on around them, unhurried and entirely indifferent to whether any of it had been practical, and the answer they had both arrived at was that it had been, just not in the way she had told herself at the beginning. The best decisions, her father had always said, were the ones you understood better after you had made them. She understood this one completely, and she had not climbed out of a window in weeks, which was the most reliable evidence she had ever collected that she was finally in the right room.